It's time for another show from Col Jones, the Reasonable Adventurer. Time for you to take another step towards creating your own opportunities for satisfaction.
And it is a huge welcome to you all to episode 122 of the Reasonable Adventurer. I'm in a bit of a state of flux at the moment. I'm working through so many different ideas and thinking about how they all fit together. And I thought, using the backstage, front stage metaphor, I might let you in on a little bit of that work today so you can get a more accurate sense of where not only the show, but myself and hopefully us as a community are headed towards. It's been nearly 10 years since I started the show, The Reasonable Adventurer, and there's been some off and on moments which most probably are reflective of my own life in terms of being in a privileged enough position to be able to take the time to create the episodes, to talk to people, to take time to reflect and think, which is not always easy in modern day life. And along the way, I've had that sort of the glory, I suppose, of being able to step back from time to time and listen to a few episodes and think, wow, that's pretty good. Yeah, I didn't realise I covered that. I didn't think I spoke about that in as much detail as I did, or whatever the case is. So I find listening to old episodes really interesting because many of those thoughts have left. They're gone. And when I go back and listen, I think, actually, not too bad. The really cool news, I think, is that where we're going is actually so far more advanced than where we've been. And I think it has to be that way for me to be able to genuinely know that I can actually create some value for other people, which is ultimately my motivation. How can I help other people to help themselves? To do something simple, to do something quite complex, but how can I help people to help themselves, to create those opportunities for satisfaction? So when we go back a little bit and think about my observations on what I've been focused upon up until now about becoming a reasonable adventurer, and we're talking about essentially a mindset. We talk about 6 attributes that the reasonable adventurer is developed around. The first one being intellectuality. And here we're just simply talking about your ability to be able to hold on to your thinking and not process it automatically. To be able to understand the importance of context. To understand when a theory or a process or a concept would be applicable and when would it not be. To understand the layers of thinking, the layers of history that may lay behind an idea or a concept, and just being able to stop for a moment. Secondly, close friendships. So that ability to understand the world through the perspective of other people. Don't have to agree with everybody, but being able to take the time to understand why it is that other people hold certain viewpoints, what experiences they've had, how do they differ from yours, and allowing that to shape your own ways of thinking. Value judgments is the third area. And this is a learned experience for many of us. It's so easy to default to what society wants from us, to think about the expectations that are placed on us. But ultimately, for us to make our own way through life, we need to have our own experiences, and we need to develop confidence in ourselves to understand what it is we want, how we want to operate in society, and how we can find that balance between doing what we want to do and what society expects us to do. Being the ADHD type person that I am, and my inability to organise things, the tolerance for ambiguity, the fourth attribute, it's been one that I've been able to work with very, very easily and to help learners in the past because I'm a model of it. I have no choice but to deal with ambiguity simply because of the way my mind deals with things. But when we step into the unknown, nobody gets a playbook that says, here are the 5 steps that you need to follow. We're always surrounded by ambiguity. We need to find ways to be able to reset things, to take our time, and to just accept that the small decisions that we make can be tested, they can be trialed, and they'll eventually shape where we're ultimately heading. The breadth of interest is one that I've always held on to romantically, because I think being able to develop an uncommon interest in the commonplace is something that we would all love to do. We would all love to think we don't have to leave our surrounds, our favourite areas, our friends and family to pursue the bigger and better things somewhere else. We could just look at our feet, that we could actually find opportunities in our life. The sense of humour, I think, luckily for me, in my ups and downs in life, I think that's one of the things that's kept me going. And I know for many people, when we can bring that benign sense of humour into our lives, it certainly helps us to be able to keep moving forward, to not resent things in life, to not see agendas that don't exist. And I think this is one of the most important aspects of the Reasonable Adventurer. And for my good friend in England, Tom, we always like to think that energy is the 7th attribute, but it's not officially. But we tend to use it there, and that's just being able to see other forms of energy that are operating in society, someone's agenda, someone's advertising, a trend in society, and being able to align our actions to that, to be able to tap into that. So they're the 6 or 7, if you're listening, Tom, attributes of the Reasonable Adventurer. And as I said before, we're dealing with it as a mindset. If you can develop a mindset, this could be beneficial to your ability to attempt to create opportunities for satisfaction. However, as I've been rolling through and getting older and thinking more and reading more, you start to realize that that's all well and good, but ultimately a mindset is a mindset. It doesn't actually mean that the cognitive architecture of your brain has been rewired. It can be quite a desirable thing to have a mindset, right? We understand what it is. We have opportunities where we might be encouraged to use those attributes, but it doesn't mean that they become the sort of presets in our thinking, that there's a default now that we always go back to. And I think that's where my research, my reading, my thinking, and my motivations have really moved to. What actually is it that we can be doing to not only embed those attributes, but other models of the world that would enable us to be pre-prepared for anything that's going to come our way, anything that might be in the way of those goals that we might be wanting to step into. And so in the most recent episodes, you'll have heard me talking about things like a calling, your vocational calling, something that you know you want to do. You may not have been able to find time, you might not have found the courage, you may have not considered yourself capable of completing that journey. But there's something in all of us that suggests you were born with a purpose, that there's something that you know you would gain a lot of satisfaction from being able to pursue. And I think that's the challenge. And that's where we get to with this notion of the primed adventurer. The primed adventurer is simply the development of an individual who's capable of actually being a reasonable adventurer, but with a lot of other tools in the tool belt, so to speak. It's about understanding the neuro aspects of what it actually means to change the architecture of our own brains. That's what it would mean to embrace the notion of becoming primed for adventuring. And so that's where I see primed adventuring as being a solution, and a really, really fantastic journey. It's my journey, my opportunity to become a reasonable adventurer, to create opportunities for satisfaction, is essentially by developing a model and a process to support people to become primed for adventuring. And I'm well and truly on the way to doing that, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. But I think the biggest challenge for me is getting people to see that broader skill set. We've talked a lot about the 6 attributes, but if we put them into the context of that broader range of things. So we've started talking in the recent episodes about the importance of being able to pause, being able to create that gap, that space between stimulus and response. And we've talked a lot about, in that space, being able to reset your subject-object relations with the world so that you can identify what it actually is that has you. What are you subject to? And you can turn it around and make that the object of your thinking. When we do that, we can really embrace the 6 attributes of the reasonable adventurer, but we can also move into a whole range of other mental models. Things like recognizing the ability to then cultivate a beginner's mind, where we don't carry unnecessary assumptions and pre-existing thoughts into new situations, where we can engage in forms of dialogue with people that are as much based on listening and understanding others as they are about us expressing our vision, our interests, and our desires. That we can recognize the horizon of expectations that we all hold from one day to the next in terms of what we believe is about to happen, and more importantly, how that horizon of expectations, those assumptions, are forever being changed by the experiences that actually don't align to those expectations. And we can think about the different forms of reasoning that are always in play. Some of them are subconscious and we're just not as familiar with them. And some of them are quite inductive, some of them are deductive, and some are retroductive, where we're really just surmising what must be for something to occur. We do that as humans. It's one of the great cognitive sort of achievements of humans, being able to speculate, to have conjecture. But we don't always celebrate it as being a necessary part of our reasoning. There's our ability to recognize the character traits we have that are constant, that are always on display in all different contexts, and those that are variable. And how we might actually think about, do we want to get rid of the variable ones? Do we want to increase them? And actually thinking about that pathway to personal development. So those are mental models that we can develop through the process of primed adventuring that are really about us and our ability to understand ourselves. So they're really very focused priming tools to enable us to engage in the world in a productive manner. But there are another range of tools, and we've covered many of them in past episodes, that relate to energy, our ability to develop a resource profile and audit it and monitor it so that we know that we've got the right social capital, financial capital, human capital, and understanding how that will vary as we turn in one direction and try to achieve something in this area, as opposed to when we turn to the left and now we're trying to achieve something else, and all of a sudden we've got deficiencies, or we might have a better alignment in areas of social, human, and financial capital. There's also our ability to just read the environment, to understand where the selective pressures are and where there is ecological energy that we can tap into. That helps us to then be able to sort of make sense of the rules of the game. Whenever we step into a space, there's always rules of the game. Some things can't be replaced. They have just entrenched in society. They're meshed. Some things can be. But what would be the right place to do them? And that leads us to thinking about understanding legitimacy, how we can create cognitive legitimacy, how we can overcome a lack of socio-political legitimacy, but again, mental models around legitimacy and the questions that need to be asked. Just as there is for value creation logics. Are we trying to create a value chain, value shop, value networks, different sets of questions that need to be asked in order for us not just to conceive how we might create value, but to demonstrate the mechanics and the processes through which we could capture that value. And then, of course, that all leads to the process of understanding environmental matching. How do we create that link, that symbiotic link between ourselves and our actions and the environments that we engage in? How do we modify ourselves? How do we modify aspects of the environment to ensure that can occur? And one of the biggest mental models that I believe that we need to deal is in relation to systems convening and how we actually develop the actual traits of a systems convener. Somebody who's actually able to work in a community, to engage with people, to understand boundaries, to understand issues of legitimacy, to understand how people can work collaboratively to achieve common goals, even though it might be about you pursuing your own individual journey. And then there are other tools in relation to things like surpetition. De Bono's idea that why would we want to waste energy competing head-to-head with people when we could surpass the existing ways of doing things in society and actually operate on our own basis. That is such a powerful idea, and so few people think about it. They just assume that there has to be this competitive advantage which is gained through their actions, rather than thinking about how there might actually be more of a differential advantage that could be achieved by them operating on their own terms and in ways which don't seek to harm other people. So it's through design, right? It's about being creative. And there's definitely mental models around issues of lateral thinking and creativity that we can learn, that we can understand when those issues of judgment and suspending judgment need to be in play. And I think this brings us back, once we're sort of working in this mode, to then start thinking through, okay, so what might that mean for us in terms of ourselves? Because it sounds like we're changing a lot, right? Will anyone recognize me in the future? And I think this is the beauty of understanding mental models that are very new to us. Concepts and ideas which change our perspective of ourselves. So in this particular context, a mental model built around the notion of autopoiesis. Autopoiesis is the ability to be and become. To be and to become. So we can think of the caterpillar that becomes a butterfly. But when we see the butterfly, we don't really see the caterpillar anymore, right? But the same DNA structure is in the butterfly as was in the caterpillar. But there's this process of change, right? It was and it became. It's the same for us. When you meet somebody at your high school reunion 30, 40, 50 years down the track, you may look very different. You may be very different body size, different hair, all those things that make it difficult for people to see the pattern in your face or whatever it is, or hear your voice or whatever it might be that helps them to make the connection. But the reality is there's something about you at age 60 or at age 40 that is exactly the same as when you were 15. And that's the order that has to remain in order for other change to occur. The caterpillar can only become a butterfly because of the DNA order that exists. And we become more advanced, we become more capable of pursuing opportunities for satisfaction, not because we change everything, but we change aspects, but those changes are actually built on those constant characters. Might be a sense of humour, might be our ability to focus on the detail. There are certain characteristics we have which are ideal for us to actually keep and leverage our change upon. And then we have other processes. How do we change in groups, in society? How do we sell? How do we identify other people's pain? How do we, change the way in which we talk to people based on the clues they give us in terms of their general personality? And of course, we're living in this incredible world now where notions of AI literacy are becoming more and more important, right? So do we have to slog through everything? Or can we actually develop a capacity and a capability for using AI in ways that are highly beneficial to us? It doesn't outsource all the cognitive process, because we want to be alive and we want to be thinking through things, but it does a lot of the hard yards for us. It moves us forward. So, look, they're just some of the mental models that I'm going to be really focused on developing resources that allow you in real time or simulated time to actually start thinking about how are you pursuing your calling, your opportunities for satisfaction, whatever they may be. And it could be as simple as being able to live free of anxiety. That would be a fantastic outcome for anyone, right? In terms of pursuing opportunities for satisfaction. Or it could be something grandiose, huge development, scaling up a business and taking on all sorts of complexity. It doesn't really matter if it's the big thing, the small thing. It doesn't matter. Overcoming anxiety in your life, where those subject-object relations are so entwined and difficult to see and difficult to understand, that's a massive outcome, right? As a society, we tend not to sort of do a hell of a lot to actually compliment people on being able to overcome that. So how? What would be my plans to bring the primed adventuring to life, to ensure that we create more space for the reasonable adventurer to emerge in your own existence? Well, I've been looking at a range of different ways of doing it, and I think this is a bit frustrating in one sense, because you only have the time that you have, limited time per week to sort of attend to these things. But I've been writing a series of books, which are really sort of supplementary to a main book that I've got coming on primed adventuring, so that will be out very soon. So I'm just doing the last couple of chapters now to really provide people with an overall introduction, so you can really understand how all of these things fit together. But I think the best way to actually help people is to build a community. And I found the right process to do that. So I'm in the process of investigating that and planning that and thinking about the initial resources that need to have been developed to actually welcome people into that community and to ensure that it gives them enough value so that they think, you know what, this is a space I want to be in. And then thinking about the types of processes of engagement that would be required to enable people to find their buddies, to find their friends in that community, and to actually be able to move forward and to help each other. I always learn so much from my students because my students would get into their groups, and before I knew it, there would be an exchange of ideas, of culture, of energy between the members of those groups. And you would see the students growing in front of your eyes, not because you did anything other than you created the opportunity for them to operate in groups. And I still see now on social media, I still see the members of those groups holding their kids together, engaging with each other online, talking about things, reminiscing, and it gives me a lot of satisfaction. And I think to myself, maybe they learned nothing from me, but maybe they made those friendships, and that would make it all worthwhile. And so I'm still very motivated by that. And my challenge now is to move everything from this backstage that I'm on and to get it onto the front stage, to get it into this community that we can say, guys, it's open for business. Come in here and have a look around. See if this is the sort of thing that you want to be a part of. See if the opportunities for development are in line with where you want to go, and for it to be meaningful. And I think we live in a pretty unique time when the technology that is becoming available to us makes this all available on our computer, on our phones, and it's just getting easier and easier. So I'm very, very excited, I would say, about the new year. I think that's most probably the most realistic timeline, January, to be launching that process and being able to engage with you face to face on our screens, to be able to provide more support. I'm really excited by that. And I just need to organise myself a little bit more and get these final resources finished, and then we can all come together and do something really, really meaningful. So, I would say, hang in there. The good stuff is coming. I'm super excited to share it with you. But until we meet again, search for adventure everywhere.